Hello and welcome to Stock and Roll, the podcast where we deep dive into the world of equity compensation. Today we have a very special guest with us, Dirk Besse, the managing partner of Mofo Germany, and without the doubt, the most renowned IPO lawyer I know. Who better to dive into the complex world of IPO preparation than Dirk? We'll discuss the most common structures put in place ahead of an IPO and how to handle the pina colada threat, the classic challenge of ensuring people don't just cash out and head off to a tropical island with an umbrella drink instead of being committed and reinvest. We will also touch on the German Future Financing Act and whether it has any real impact on IPO planning. It's an episode packed with valuable insights from one of the best in the business, so stay tuned. Okay, today we are here with Dirk Besse of Morrison Foerster. We are in Berlin. The sun is shining. Dirk is a lawyer, and hopefully it won't be a boring lawyer talk, but diving a bit into some exciting aspects related to both German but also European aspects of share plans, both pre and post IPO. Welcome, Dirk. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, and welcome to Berlin. Thanks for bringing a bit of sun into the gray time of the year.
Yeah, we were expecting, we didn't expect this beautiful weather when we were flying down, so it's very, very surprised that it's okay that we left our coats home.
Yeah.
Today's topic, quite broad, at least in our world, but we want to dive a bit into, first of all, like a pre-IPO stage, a growth company doing really well and start to plan for an IPO. Obviously, you being a lawyer, so that will be a bit of the backdrop of the talk. But we want to kind of think a bit like, what are the common instruments out there? Are there any specifics in the regions that you see? And then dive a bit into challenges with actually IPOing, because we see that is with some movements in the pre-IPO stage. We think that may be something that the listeners would really like to. So for starting off, asking a bit of questions like, here in the German, DACH, European region, in growth companies, pre-IPO, could you just share some lights on what are the typical share plans that you come across and see?
Yeah. No, happy to do so. And of course, the pre-IPO scene in Europe has been more active than it has been over the last 2 years. So the markets are warming up and plan for a more interesting 2025 and 2026. If you look at what the companies in the growth stage do in order manage incentive programs for their executives and employees, it's mainly largely mirroring what they have seen and learned in the United States as the country where that's seen as a role model. So you have mostly typical equity programs incentivizing employees and participants on the ultimate target, which is the IPO as the exit event in that case.
Yeah. Are there any, now I'm kind of a bit specific on call it like Germany, like virtual programs, challenges with notary. Are there any kind of, do you see more of that here than in other countries in the growth companies? Or is that like, just to kind of understand a bit that area?
Yeah. Well, Germany has usually for the startup companies the legal form of a GmbH.
Yeah.
That's a common company limited by shares, and transfer of shares in those entities, they require notarization. So that's a very formal and burdensome act. And that is why sometimes that is avoided, or you need structures where employees are pooled, maybe in a partnership, and then this partnership is investing jointly into the startup company, so that you have ways of managing exits and entrance of new employees more effectively. Well, that's a common problem to be addressed under those German regimes.
Yeah.
Which then the companies grow older, more mature, and towards IPO, then they usually have to, well, not usually, but they have to change legal form into a stock corporation or a European stock corporation, an SE.
Yeah.
And then things get easier because the shares in those entities are freely tradable.
Yeah. So that kind of leads to, in the very, very early stage, there's more virtual programs. And then when you kind of grow a bit, it's more and more equity kind of things that will end up in a share, or?
Yes, to my observations, I would say the equity program is quite hot from the very beginning, and companies and founders are not so keen on virtual programs.
Yeah.
And you see that as well, that you have a cash incentive on an exit event.
Yeah.
But equity is key, I would say.
That's good. That's good. In terms of like, because often you have time, so you have to render services, and then after time, if the value goes up, you can exercise the options, or you get the share after time has passed or so. We kind of, in some countries, we see a bit more trend on like these performance programs. You mentioned an IPO as an exit trigger. That can be like one of these triggers for things to kind of happen. Do you see those things often, or is it more like traditional stock option programs where you have to beat a strike price in order to have gains?
I would say the traditional stock option program is the majority of the situations I come across.
Yeah.
Performance programs are very interesting and necessary to often, be serving as an add-on to the classical equity program, especially in the situation we are now in, because of the slow IPO market and the slow exit market. You have a number of startup companies which are running now as a startup company for quite some time.
Yeah.
The time horizon that founders and executives had in mind for their incentive programs, they are now dragging out, and including now some kind of incentive program, or that is bound to performance goals, is a need that we see in the market now.
Yeah, interesting. So, meaning that the IPO market, you could say, has been slow the last like 2 years, causes input to designing programs because of that. You actually need to. It wasn't so clear that within 3 years, and that's very interesting. How could you? So just to kind of dive a bit deeper into that in detail, how can you structure that into agreements? Is it like revenue goals? Is it EBIT goals, or do you see any kind of other?
That's of course mainly driven by the specifics of that very company, what their milestones for the next level of achievements are. That can be related to financing round, markets and entries, or reaching certain achievements towards profitability. So this is very different from company to company. A bit like the programs that you see after an IPO, where the KPIs that are, used to steer the company and measure its performance are then also used to be implemented into the incentive programs.
Cool. And also kind of continue a bit on that sidetrack, but other exit opportunities would typically be like a financial player, private equity. Do you see like, do companies that have been waiting and don't, are people still waiting for the next IPO, or are they often looking at then different routes for exit? So if you look at stuff that you've seen the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would expect that the companies which have reached a certain level of maturity, they look at every possible opportunity. It can be a trade sale. It can be, a private sponsor that does a big investment enabling the next level of development, or it can be an IPO. So you would be well advised to monitor all three of that, and each of those solutions, if they would arrive, would also mean a different handling of the incentive program, which is very different at an IPO than it is in an equity sponsor coming in and taking over the company, financing the next growth stage, then they would, of course, directly incentivize on the next exit on the horizon. Whereas in an IPO, you are in a much more formal program that you then try to roll over.
There's a typical like kind of phrase of like a change of control, and a change of control can be many things. So what do you see is most common there? Is it like are the programs structured towards that a change of control is an IPO, or is it like a 50% transaction? And because these things will come a bit into play if you wait and you so just to understand a bit from an employee perspective, like how can it's a difficult question, but how can these things that we talk about come in play for accelerated vesting and so?
Well, if we talk about companies which are big enough that they could also consider an IPO, then we are talking about already large organizations with a degree of sophistication in management, which is already quite advanced. And in their programs, you usually see very broad definitions of exit events covering not only IPO and trade sale, but also sale of asset, de-SPAC transaction, which had been on vogue some years ago, and out of fashion now, and all kinds of other ways that could serve as a liquidity event for the overall startup.
And when it's a change of control, do you see 100% being cashed out? Do you see clauses saying 50% needs to be reinvested, or kind of are there any other popular parts here?
Well, so the usual threshold I would see most is 50%. So if you have a 50% change in ownership or sale of the assets, that would usually trigger the event. There might be some which are taking different thresholds, but that I would say is the market standard that I've seen. In terms of reinvestment, that's of course a tricky question. If you're nearing an IPO, that can of course cause frictions if the complete management is cashing in on the liquidity event, which constitutes the IPO, and then is left without future incentive program on the one hand, and on the other hand is receiving a high liquidity inflow and might come into, lifestyle decisions whether to continue on with the venture or look for something new. So that's a challenging balance to be made. But if you are after highly qualified employees, you usually don't get them with an equity program that says in case of an IPO you have to reinvest everything. So
what's the exit then?
Where's the point of such a program? So I think that needs to be more balanced, and often you would have to make such a new program, such an attractive new program, that then the employees affected do roll over voluntarily, and maybe not with 100%, but with 50% of the past incentive, and so they trust in the startup, in the venture post-IPO, and in the development of the company post-IPO, and this is documented by their own investment into that program. That, of course, that has many implications on cliff vesting and ownership on this new equity or option position. And that is, of course, a sign for a very sophisticated and promising company that is in place, and investors like that, of course, if management shows commitment to the future development.
I think this is a super kind of difficult and exciting topic, and ideally this should be thought through also when you design the program, let's say 4 years ahead of the potential IPO, right? Because if you design something that you don't want to end up in a situation where, let's say, you're 1,000 employees in a company that looks to IPO, and then 150 of those gets, call it, shitty rich, and they want to kind of go off playing golf and drink pina coladas full time. as investors, right? So that is a threat if it's and obviously there's a lot of mitigation things here, but I think like think through it when you design the program and you onboard these people. So you kind of, as you say, you can't say everything needs to be reinvested because then they won't join, but then finding that balance. And I think we'll come a bit back to it later, but like designing something that sugarcoats the deal a bit is important.
I note here that you create a new notion that I will take for further conversations with me. That is the pina colada threat.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah, that's I think
well noted.
Yeah, I think that's we see a couple of cases now where we've been into it where this is actually like how much will these people earn?
Yeah,
and that needs to be simulated. And when you look at those numbers, it's call it ridiculous numbers, and they can, if they want, just take that off, and they will be good for life, right?
Yeah.
And if it's a big company being built up, it is a threat for the continuous growth and even the IPO process, because it will of course be clear for people investing.
Also for the IPO success. Of course, investors are very carefully looking and reviewing those topics ahead of the IPO. That's a large part of those prospectuses documentation that is required there.
Yeah.
So the main topic of concern here or the headline that companies preparing for a midterm IPO should bear in mind, in my view, is flexibility.
Yeah, I agree.
So the governing bodies that are handling the program, they need to a certain extent flexibility on what they can then impose on their participants or what they can ask from their participants, because there must be a middle ground between exit and commitment to the next stage of the development. Cannot just everybody leaving it cannot be the answer.
No. Do you see any pre-IPO kind of growth company programs that have this saying that not more than 50% can be cashed out within 2 years following an exit event, or something already at design pre-regulating this, or is that something that comes for the next generation?
I would say that depends a bit on the level of program participant that you're talking to. So the management board, the CEOs or the C-level, they will definitely have to commit to certain periods of investment and not selling stock in the company. I think that is very standard, and the banks are basically enforcing that upon the IPO candidates. Then, well, someone has to negotiate that with the C-level if that is not already contained in the program. So better be prepared and have some elements of those structuring already in the program pre-IPO. Definitely, yeah.
And I assume what we talk about here is very internationally the same. This is not specific to any specific jurisdictions. This is psychology and money and...
Look, you see that in US situations as well as in Asian situations and European ones. I don't see any difference there. Maybe I would say the pina colada threat, as we have named it, is more serious in the US than it is in Europe or Asia. So the tendency to walk away after a successful liquidity event is more imminent in the US.
One example, it's way back. But I remember one case where we looked at an IPO, and out of 4,000 people, there were 700 people that was kind of looked at as key people. And all those 700 people would have what you could call like a life change revenue or kind of gains from their equity program if they decided to IPO. And within 700 key people, quite a big portion of them, it's like that was the thing that was extremely seriously considered how to and if IPO, or do we need to change something ahead of an IPO? Because obviously it's a threat.
Well, or a leverage game. In that case, it's of course the obligation of the company and the then governing boards and bodies of the company to make an attractive offer to the key employees to stay on board and to buy into the next level of development. And this is actually the very same what the investors want to see. They buy into a stock only if they see a documented path forward that promises success and and reward.
I agree. Don't have to talk too much about tax, but it could also be a challenge. Let's say that you have a program, it's vested, but you can't sell any shares because of any lockdown thing or kind of black period after an IPO or so. Have you encountered that kind of causes a challenge, that you kind of get a tax bill, but you're not really okay to sell? Or of course that can be mitigated with just some reflections around if you see that sometimes as a challenge.
Oh yeah, that's a very common challenge, especially in the German market. You see that because tax regimes are not the same everywhere. We call that dry income. When you generate a liquidity event, but you are not able to monetize on it, and then you still have to pay taxes on it. And the most common solution is that at least a substantial portion of the revenue flowing into the participants' pocket needs to be available to pay the taxes. Often, very smart programs even allow a kind of a settlement that is that allows a realization of liquidity specially designed to pay the tax that becomes inherent on that. But you see that very frequently, and it's a burden.
Obviously, coming in a situation where everyone's happy because of an IPO and the key persons are stuck with a big tax bill in their inbox.
And if you get stock in a liquid market, then of course the stock price might be floating, and what you are taxed on might not be the value that you later on can realize if the stock goes not so well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you see then? Yeah, because then you can release some of it at the same point as you're taxed, so you're sure that that's kind of set. And then if the share price drops, you at least cover the tax bill, and that's done, right? Because it's
Yes, you should. In the interest of your participants, in the incentive program, you should avoid, exposing them to too much forward risk, because frustration and cash need on the end of your participants creates frustrated and desperate employees, which you do not want. Absolutely not.
Definitely. Since we're touching tax and dry income tax and types of tax, I've heard quite a lot about this Future Financing Act in Germany. No, you're not a tax lawyer, but it would be interesting to just from your point of view, very high level, 3 sentences of what it is, and a bit if you see it's an advantage, have it changed anything or something? We can dive a bit into that.
Yeah, no, sure. Voluntarily. Well, the German Future Financing Act was basically designed to reduce the bureaucratic burden that comes along with an IPO or with the issuance of shares or overall. So all thresholds have been increased and limitations have been loosened, so it should be easier to enter the stock market. However, that's was coming into force, I think, beginning of December 2024, so it's still very recently. But only very few companies could make use of it so far, because the markets are just very slow. So we will see the practical effect of those initiatives only in the future, and cannot really judge on those effectiveness right now. You mentioned on tax, the tax situation for participants in programs on the German tax regime has not really developed. You get only incremental improvements, and not a real change of the system towards where the US or other jurisdictions are. So that has not really changed, but maybe you see more companies doing the step towards an IPO because it's less costly and less bureaucratic.
Definitely. Is it a difference on how the Future Finance Act can affect private companies versus listed companies? Is it relevant for both or none? Are there any reasons to consider it differently?
No. it mainly affects the ability to go public.
Yeah.
So that may have an impact also on not yet public company or companies intending to go public.
Yeah.
But for the real IPO event, the bureaucratic requirements are not, softened in a relevant way. So it's more for companies which are already public and then do a secondary offering or want to issue additional shares. For those, the requirements get improved.
Interesting.
Which also includes, option programs. Because those are always or mostly also covered out of additional issuances of shares.
In your view, is Future Financing Act something that international companies with an operation in Germany should know about and to think about, or is it yet not something to consider specifically?
I don't think that this is a relevant element for real global players because they have their listing jurisdiction somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they look at the requirements at this home jurisdiction and whether they are active with some operations in a certain jurisdiction. That, to my experience, doesn't really matter.
No.
They just try to design their incentive programs in a way that they at least work overall in the world. So there's a certain minimum standard. But actually, most of the jurisdictions that I'm aware of have sufficient carve-outs. And if a program is designed under one jurisdictions of decent standing, then the local jurisdiction doesn't cause too many problems or requirements in addition.
No. Are there any other kind of high level topics for now? We talk still like a pre-IPO company. If you're a big growth company, Nordic or UK based, any other high level topics that call it these companies need to educate themselves on if having quite a big workforce in Germany?
Well, that's a good question. The recent legislative initiatives have not brought substantial changes on that. There might be actually more to expect from, as you know, the newly elected parliament in Germany, which might end up in a new coalition very soon. They have promised to give pushes and more attention to the economic development and, of course, growth companies and participation of employees is a topic that will be on their agenda as well. Yeah,
I think it's hopefully a movement across many countries now that it is a bit of a challenge when you want to kind of build and invent, and if things are taxed too hard or too heavy before there's liquidity. And we see of course, me coming from the Nordics, that there's a few initiatives on more favorable and easier to qualify programs that will kind of either delay tax until there's actually possible to sell some shares, and or making the programs not income tax but capital gains tax, and also then avoid social security and NIC. And I think those movements, we at least see some elements on it.
As always, the Nordics countries run ahead with innovative solutions, and it would be good if other jurisdictions follow along. Tax is, of course, always a sensitive issue, and it's for each jurisdictions with a lot of tradition and guardrails, and it's very different. And what my plea would be is simplicity. It's not the payment of tax itself, but it needs to be a simple system that is applied, and that would help already a lot.
Make it understandable. But cool. I think we have another topic that we want to cover with you, but for the pre-IPO and the kind of the rules and everything around that, I think we're kind of covered the topics that I wanted to. So for now, I'd say thank you, Dirk. It was a pleasure, and looking forward to talk more to you later.
Yes, it was a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you.